Oh, the same. Just send the V
Oh,
Longo
we're on live.
Okay.
Hello, Professor Valter Longo. Welcome to our live call. I know we have a lot of people waiting, and we now have the man of the hour. So hopefully everyone is still with us and still hanging in there. I just want to check and make sure if someone wants to say that they can hear us and we're all good, that would be awesome. Whilst we do that, I'm just going to introduce who we're speaking to today. So, Professor Valter Longo, welcome. He's an award-winning researcher, gynecology and biological sciences professor and director of the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California. He developed the fasting mimicking diet, which we're going to speak about today, the internationally renowned, clinically tested, revolutionary diet program to lose weight, fight disease, and live a longer, healthier life. Now, Professor Valter Longo, we spoke I think it was last year now, and we had an interesting chat all about time-restricted feeding and the fasting mimicking diet and what you've created, and we've had loads of questions come up, so we're really honoured to have you back here chatting with us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, I want to kickstart off the conversation with something that came up from our last conversation that I found really interesting myself, but also that a lot of our community had loads of questions on. And that was around the idea of time-restricted feeding and what you've studied and what you've understood. Now, you mentioned that, now the first question we have on that is that you mentioned that 12 hours of time-restricted feeding is the most beneficial from the research that you've done. And we have a lot of people in our community that do a lot of intermittent fasting. So be it, a 24-hour fast or fasting, alternate day fasting. And then there's a lot of the 16-hour fast per day and things like this. So what is it about the 12 hours that you found to be most beneficial, and why?
Well, I think it's lots of people forget that the mission, at least our mission, is not really about what happens to you in the next 30 days. My mission certainly is a double one. And one is, can I get you to 100 years of age healthy? And two, can I get you to 70 years of age young? And that's very difficult to do, right? So, it's really, the short-term benefits can sometimes, I view them as irrelevant, meaning that it doesn't matter if somebody can be on cocaine and say, I'm doing great, and that doesn't mean you're gonna say this is a good thing for somebody to do. And it's the same thing with all kinds of diets. You could see great results. Let's say 16 hours, of course, it's gonna work. You're gonna lose weight. You're gonna have lots of benefits. But then you look at the data and you see that there is, for example, a major increase in gallstone formation, gallbladder operation. Most people that do 16 hours are gonna skip breakfast. The data is showing clearly that the association, people that skip breakfast live shorter, have more diseases. So it's not a good start, right? Particularly when you do something to do better than normal. We already have some things that are worse than normal or much worse than normal. That's why you don't want to get into something that is associated with doing worse than normal. Now, 12 hours, there is no evidence that it's going to be bad for gallstones. There is no evidence that it's going to shorten lifespan. In fact, there's lots of evidence that it's going to make you probably live longer, and so that's a good way to go. It's safe. It's really an important piece of, I think, of making people get to 100 years of age healthy.
Sure. And so there is a lot of studies and stuff, particularly around, fasting for 16 hours. And a lot of our community have reported back, with over a long period of time, for them, it's been really beneficial in a lot of, in their goals and being able to lose weight and feel better, and be it tried all the different other approaches. So do you think that this is, like, I think a lot of people kind of pulled back after they heard heard our talk last time, because they got confused as to if they should continue down that, which feels good for them, or if they should stop and reassess and think about what you've said and change up what they're doing. What do you suggest?
I think it's a matter of risk, right? So meaning that if somebody has such a problem, let's say somebody who's obese, had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, et cetera, and then they did 16 hours and they went from this very high risk state to a much better position, and they can handle it. Then I would say talk to your doctor. Now you're taking a chance in the long run, because it may be that you don't find out the damage until 10 years down the road, or 12 years down the road, or 22 years down the road, right? So somebody is 35, 22 years down the road is 57. So it's a long time, but you're young, and all of a sudden somebody may say, "Hey, your liver is damaged." And why? Well, you did something that most people didn't do in the last, however many hundreds of years. So, you're exposing yourself to a situation that is not really understood very well and is associated with problems, right? So why are people that skip breakfast, that are probably doing 15, 16 hours a day fasting, why do they live shorter? Is it because they have some other bad behavior, or is it the 16 hour? And so for somebody to adapt that, you will want to see clear, beneficial results from multiple pillars. In the book, I talk about epidemiological studies, clinical studies, basic research, centenarian studies. How many centenarians go 16 hours without eating? Very few, right? Very few. It's not, say, well, how is it that all these people made it to very old ages, very thin, and they never use 16-hour fasting, right? And that's even worse when you get to 65 and 70, because then people tend to lose weight. But of course, your audience may not be made of 70-year-olds, but still, once you get to a certain age, that these problems that we already observe may even get worse, right? So I think it's good to stick with 12 hours time restricted feeding. That's a great one. And they're going to see lots of benefits, because most people eat for 15 hours a day. Now, that's clearly bad. So you go from 15 to 12, and I would say it's okay if it takes you a year longer to get where you need to get. That's okay, because now 12 hours is much more feasible, more doable, and people are more likely to stick with it. 16 hours of alternate day fasting, all these things, people are, and we know this from many type of diets, right? And people get very good at doing something for 6 months, or even a year, or even they can make it 2 years, some people. And then they say, I hate this, why? It disrupts my life, and then they go back to where they came from and worse, right? And that's very, very common. So I think it's better to stick with something that may give you slower benefits, but are safer. And your grandparents did it, your great-grandparents did it. So it's probably not a bad strategy.
Awesome. And that actually was a question that came up earlier for women, especially that are over 60 years old. You recommend not fasting for longer than 14 hours a day. Is that due to what you mentioned just then about them being able to lose weight at a quicker pace?
Well, not longer than 12 hours a day, right? So I think, I will stick with 12 hours of feeding and 12 hours of fasting. And it seems that there's lots of data now suggesting that at a certain age, you need a little bit of fat reserves. And it's not clear why, but even in mice that are restricted, the ones that do the best are the ones that can keep some fat storage. And so, it is very possible that that by pushing the system over the edge with this fasting, and you can do damage, particularly to people that have reached a certain age and they're getting into the elderly stage.
Sure. Awesome. Now let's talk about breakfast for a second. So there is a lot of now so many different takes on this that breakfast, is the most important meal of the day, and then, skipping breakfast, there's so many benefits because you're in detoxification mode, you're high in autophagy mode. So when you say breakfast is important, is there a time of day that you found is good for eating breakfast, and what does that kind of look like for people?
Yeah, in the book, again, I talk about we need to move away from ideas and one pillar strategy and the fact that somebody says this and somebody says that. And you need to have a system, and a strategy. This is why I say it's good to fly on Boeing and Airbus. They never come down. They have a system. They develop a system. It took them decades, but they develop a system that makes planes that never crash. And that's what you want to do with whether it's breakfast or dinner. So what does the data show? Well, the data shows that there is really no negative data on people that eat breakfast, right? And there's lots of negative data on people that don't eat breakfast. So I think it's good to keep it. Now, I think the variation is not very clear if it's a big breakfast or a small breakfast, which one is best. But certainly having breakfast seems to be important. It's also important for compliance. People like breakfast. And if you have it, you're probably more likely to be happy during the day and more likely to stick with it than if you don't. So if you get up at 6 and have dinner at 8, then you probably have to go a couple hours without food until you have breakfast. Why? Because otherwise you're gonna eat for 14, 15 hours a day, right? So then if you get up at 6, you wait until 8 and have breakfast at 8, and then be done eating by 8 p.m. and you're good to go.
Okay, cool. And so what about if you're someone who's experienced like more positive results by pushing back your breakfast to a later time? Like, say, if someone doesn't eat until 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., but they're still finishing their dinner at like 7 p.m., 8 p.m., obviously that's pushing the fasting window forward. And, and so a lot of people report that they experience a lot more energy through the morning and don't feel fatigue and stuff. So is there something that they should look at, perhaps eating at that time or drinking at that time, or what do you see around that?
Well, again, if somebody's got such of a problem, right, that they cannot deal with it, right? It could be obesity, it could be depression, and all of a sudden they start eating at 11 and that problem goes away. I mean, I have a hard time saying, well, go back to your problem. But I would say talk to your doctor, and if you really use that to solve such a big problem, it may be worth the risk then you're taking with all the things that I've been saying, right? But if you don't really have a problem that you're solving by doing that, I think it's best to stick with what people have been doing for thousands of years. Have the breakfast and stick with 12 hours a day. And in the great majority of cases, you're gonna do very well. It may take you a little bit longer to get where you think you need to get, but you'll get there. You get there with for example, I talk in the book about eating twice a day instead of 3 times a day. If you're overweight or obese, you go to breakfast plus lunch or breakfast plus dinner, and then you have a snack, and that's it. So these are the techniques that seem to be supported by lots of studies. There's really no negative data about it, and so that's the way I would do it, rather than going with these long fasting periods and or going with skipping breakfast almost altogether.
Sure. Awesome. And then the other question I had on that was, hang on, let me just check that there's questions coming through on this topic and make sure everyone's getting. If you're popping your questions in, guys, we'll get to that when we can. We do have a question coming through with, is coffee breaking your fast? That's the first one I've just seen then. That's kind of relevant to, I guess, breakfast time. Is coffee breaking your fast?
Well, I mean, coffee is a drug essentially, right? And it's a good drug, and and that's okay to drink a couple of coffees a day, maybe even 3 coffees a day normally. Not during the fast. The fast is both because it may interfere with the fasting, and also because it's really important when you think like with coffee that you need something all the time. It's really important to get away from it, right? If you feel like you can never be without coffee, it's time to test yourself and try to go as long as possible without it. It's a good lesson, and independently of the effects of the caffeine on the actual fasting process, I think it's a very good. It's very good to get away from whether it's sugars or coffee or whatever else you may be addicted to.
Yeah, awesome. I like it. And
now I also say that if you're about to quit your fasting because of coffee, then okay, have a coffee. If you're just going to drop out of the fasting or the fasting mimicking diet because you have such a headache or such a problem that it's going to push you to do that, then that's the only time when we say go ahead and have it, because it's better than to have one coffee and to continue the fast than drop out.
Yeah, perfect. Now, if someone was now doing 12 hours of eating and fasting daily, and they're in this routine, is there benefits to throwing in like a 24-hour water fast weekly, or and more of an extended water fast more frequently? Is there benefits to doing that?
We don't know, and now we think that because to go with 24 hours without eating for the great majority of people, it's a very tough situation. Of course, anybody can do it a couple of times, right? But when every week you're told you're gonna stay without food for a whole day, that becomes a terrible day for most people that I know all over the world. So in general, if you start with this idea, it's not a good idea. It's going to be dropped, right? People cannot do that. Now, some people can do all kinds of things, but the great majority of people cannot do that. A. B, you're not really that's the worst day of all, right? Why? Because that's a transition day where your body is slowly starting to move towards burning the glycogen, burning the sugar reserves, and then moving to the fat burning. So it's really a day of suffering, right? And the best days, this is why the 5 days fasting or fasting mimicking diet, because the first couple of days you suffer, and then you switch, and then the rest of the time you're not even hungry, right? So if you only do one day, you're just pushing yourself to do this very frequent thing, suffer like hell for one day, never get into the ketogenic mode, never get into the breakdown and rebuilding mode, because the body is not pushed to enough breakdown, and then there is not enough to rebuild. Right? And that's what we've shown to be really essential with the 5-day FMD. And so does that mean that one day of fasting a week will not be good? No, I don't think so. I probably think it'd be very good, but it's probably not feasible for the great majority of people. And it's much better to, a couple of times a year, wait for the time where you're like, okay, now I got Sunday, I can go until Friday with the fasting mimicking diet. I'm ready to go. That's the right time. Do it periodically. Don't feel, I don't like that when people tell me or anybody I know is their way, oh, you got to do this every Friday, that's what people are not don't respond well to. But almost everybody I know said, if I have to do this a couple of times a year, these 5 days, I'll find the time. Now it's not the time, but maybe a month from now, I'll be ready to do it. And we always tell people like, look, whenever you're ready, do it. And if you're not ready, that's okay. Then if you're not ready for that, you're certainly not going to be ready to do 1 day a week of fasting, because it's really tough.
Yeah, I agree. Although we do have a lot of keen fasters listening right now, so you never know what they might be able to achieve.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying people cannot do it. I'm saying, some people can do all kinds of things. Some people are tough, some people but I'm saying also they're putting themselves into the suffering situation, because that's the toughest part of the fast, the beginning of the fast, the first 24 hours. After that, you actually feel like you can sit down. On day 3, you can sit down with people having dinner and you don't care, right? On day 1, you sit down with people having dinner, and that's like, it's true suffering. So that's a difference, right? And that's once a week to expose yourself to true suffering. Now, some people may like to suffer, and then that's okay for you.
Yeah, to be honest, I find doing a 5-day water fast much easier than doing a 24-hour fast, and that's exactly the reason why. So yes, awesome. So let's go into a little bit then of the fasting mimicking diet. So how does it work? I think people are so fascinated by this. Like, how have you managed to trick the body into thinking it's water fasting? Well, we had someone in the group recently who's just completed your prolonged fasting mimicking diet, and she was like, from going from like experiencing a 5-day water fast, this was so much easier, and she found the benefits to be really amazing as well. So what is going on?
Yeah, well, first of all, we love to eat, right? And so the FMD is really a compromise, because I didn't want to get rid of the little bit of a burden, right? It's important. I like that. That is just a challenge. It's like going running. It's not a marathon, but it's going running, and people can do it all the time. And then of course you got to get all the benefits of fasting. And we're starting to think that now we have some evidence, or lots of evidence, that it may be more than water only fasting, right? So now we're getting into what we call the enhancing part, right? There are ingredients in there. First of all, every little piece of the FMD is designed to trick the system in a respectful way, meaning trick the system to thinking it's fasting, but in a respectful way, because in a way it is fasting, right? It's got 1,100 calories on day 1. It's got 800 calories on day 2, 3, 4, 5. So we don't want to completely biohack, right? Because we are respectful of these billions of years of evolution that are really there to make you respond to fasting. If you try to biohack it too much, then the system is going to respond in a positive way and in a negative way. So now you learn the connection, let's say, between proteins and amino acids, and certain amino acids, and TOR and IGF-1, sugars and pKa. That's what we spent the last 25 years doing. And some of this connection we discovered ourselves, particularly when it comes to aging and cellular protection and regeneration. And then once we learned all that, then it was just a matter of putting it all together and making sure that the mouse and then humans respond to this fasting mimicking diet as they will respond to water-only fasting. But of course now, not only do they have food, but they have food that is really also designed to fill them as much as possible, as feasible, right? I mean, they're not going to be as happy as eating normally, but certainly we wanted to make it doable and pretty straightforward. So we have now American football players that do it. We have all kinds of people that you would think there's no way this person is going to be able to do it, and they say not a problem. So yeah, that's important. Now then, the enhancing part, that's the next generation. Is we're there's lots of things in there that are not just selected to fool the system, but they're selected to also contribute to the system in a way that the system is now responding even more than if it was just fasting, water-only fasting, right? So those are the things that we haven't published yet, and soon enough we'll publish them.
Ooh, that's exciting. So I haven't been able to try FMD yet because you don't ship to Canada at the moment, and I'm currently in Canada, but I believe you guys are working on that. So anyone else in Canada, they're working on it. So I decided to do a 5-day water fast instead recently. And do you still promote doing 5-day water fasts for people, or do you think that the substitute is better off?
No, I never did. I never promoted the 5 days. I always say you could do it in a clinic. There are clinics, the Buchinger Clinic in Germany, the True North Clinic in Northern California. They have medical personnel, and that's a place where you can do water-only fasting, or something very close to water-only fasting. And there's nothing wrong with it if you have the clinic and you have the medical personnel. Anybody that knows about fasting will tell you it's a mistake to do a water-only fasting at home. Again, it does not mean people cannot do it. You did it, you were fine. The question is, if you told 1 million people to do it, and some of them might have some disease, some of them might have low blood pressure, some of them might have low blood sugar, what happens to them, right? So we have to think about, we have the responsibility to think about everybody, and we have to think about everybody after they do it 50 times, 100 times, right? Unfortunately, lots of people think, myself, 1 time, and we think like everybody 100 times, right? And so that's where you go from water-only fasting to clinically tested fasting mimicking diet. Now we have data from 80,000 people. We're going to have reports from the doctors from 2,500 patients, hundreds of doctors reporting. That's what we want to have. We really want to make sure that the end doesn't justify the mean. So that we don't have 5%, 10%, 20% at any given time, by the way, having some problems. This is very clear that happens when you do water-only fasting. 1 in 10, 1 in 20 people, if you go for 5 days, you're going to have problems. We don't really see that with the FMD, and it makes sense. It doesn't mean that the FMD is not, completely separated or void of side effects. There are some minor side effects, but not the ones that you see with the water-only fasting. For example, the blood pressure drop could be much more extreme with the water-only fasting, and so can be the glycemia, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, so then water-only fasting only in clinics. For people that are not in a clinic, then FMD and the supervision and the screening that comes with it, right? So the questions, do you have diabetes? Do you take insulin? Do you take blood pressure medication? Once you allow people to improvise, whether it's water-only fasting or whatever else, then it's basically, I tell people, it's hard for people to appreciate it. But it's like if you went to the pharmacy, you grabbed a bunch of drugs because your friends take them, and say, oh, my friends take these drugs. It's okay, I'm just going to take 3 or 4 myself every day. What could go wrong, right? That's the same idea. Of course, we all recognize it's a bad idea. We just don't respect enough the power of fasting and all the things that happen. And that's why it's just food. How bad could it be for you? Well, several people have died of doing water-only fasting after an injection of insulin, right? One lady in Italy died of extended water-only fasting with multiple sclerosis. So, it's powerful. And if it's used properly, it's going to be a tremendous help. If it's mishandled, in rare cases, but it can even kill you.
Yeah, good point. And even like with FMD, you recommend checking in with your medical practitioner first before you start, and having that guidance and supervision. The same with any kind of fasting that someone's embarking on at home by themselves. And so we have a few questions coming in now about FMD. So I'm gonna go over to our audience who's like listening right now and has a few questions. The first one I have is from Cindy, and she says, since people eat on your 5-day fasting mimicking diet, is there an increased autophagy, or are people just benefiting from the results of weight loss?
No. I mean, there is clearly an increase in autophagy. There is clearly breakdown of lots of components, not just autophagy. The autophagy happens inside of the cell. We see also the breakdown at the cellular level, so lots of cells we get rid of, and then of course you rebuild intracellularly and cellularly and at the tissue level, and that's the idea of the fasting mimicking diet. Now, could we go further? Some people say, well, but there are carbohydrates in the diet, and why don't you go more extreme? Well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to go more extreme because we want to make sure that we first do no harm, right? So we want to make sure that people can do it 100 times, and I say you could get a 10 out of 10 effect, let's say, right? And rebuilding, rejuvenating, etc. I'd rather have an 8 out of 10, but make sure or really minimize the chance of a side effect even 20 years down the road, right? That's our job. Fine, you get 8 out of 10, but I protect you first. And that's really the idea of not necessarily pushing the autophagy and the ketone bodies to the high level where they could get, because we want this to be part of the, say 3 times a year for an average for people all over the world. And and then we don't want to necessarily push them to an extreme 3 times a year. We rather get a little bit less, but make sure that they make it to 100 healthier.
Yeah, beautiful. And she also says, how much does eating pure fat during a fast hurt autophagy?
You mean if you have water-only fasting and you eat pure fat?
Might be, yeah.
Yeah, again, this is an improvised strategy. It could work great. You do it 5 times, and then you'll find out that the 6th time you pass out while you're driving in the middle of the highway. I mean, I've seen that, right? So I've seen a lot of. I've got telephone calls and emails from doctors saying, please tell people to stop this, because when you start improvising like that, a lot of people are going to get hurt and they're going to end up in the emergency room. And that's what happens. You start saying, oh, let me get some fat together with the water only fasting. Yeah, sure, you could do it. Maybe for 10, 20 times you'd be fine. And then the 21st time, you're tired, it is the middle of the summer, it's hot, you're in the highway, you pass out.
Yeah, wow, interesting. And do you have, is there any lead up or lead out, I guess? So if someone's doing your FMD for 5 days, do they need to then be aware of what to do after that to essentially, break the fast or go back into their normal schedule?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is a transition day diet. And then, of course, in the book, I talk about the everyday diet and, what you do in the 25 days or, 90 days between one cycle and the other. So I think it's good to pick up the book, The Longevity Diet. All the profits go to the foundation, Create Cures. So I think it's a good way to spend however, $15 or $20.
Yeah, it is actually a really great book. And someone actually says from the book, you mentioned to have a low protein intake of below 0.8 grams per 2.2 pounds of body weight. What does he recommend for the carb and fat percentage?
60-30-10, right? And I was happy to see the Lancet publication from a couple of days ago, confirming that we were right on it. So showing the people that have about 50% carbohydrate intake live the longest, but people that have higher carbohydrate intake only have 1 year less. People that had a low carb diet live 4 years shorter. So 60-30-10. I think we get it right, and not surprising because it's based on 5 pillars, and over and over and over, whether it's centenarians or clinical studies or epidemiological studies. 60% of the calories coming from carbs seems to be a very good spot, and 30% from fat, 10% from protein. But protein, I think, is better to just get used to look at the labels, and say, say you have a salmon fillet, know that there is about 50 grams of proteins in that, and so it should be about 0.37 grams per pound of body weight, right? So if you weigh 100 pounds, it's about 40 grams of proteins. Learn your number, and once you learn your number, that's very easy. Say, if I have 300 grams of garbanzo beans, I get about 30 grams of protein, right? And once you know, you don't even have to look at the label anymore. You know that particular food component contains so many proteins, and then you know it by heart.
Sure. Now, we have a lot of plant-based advocates as well, and you talk about a pescatarian diet being best. Why is that?
Well, because of safety and feasibility. So if you take, it's a meat eating world, right? And so if you all of a sudden you take 100 people and you say stop eating all kinds of meat, you're gonna have a lot of problems, right? You're gonna have protein deficiency, you're gonna have B12 deficiency. Now, it doesn't mean that you cannot be vegan, right? So lots of people like Rich Roll and lots of people are vegan and they do great, but they pay attention, they really pay attention. They learn, they know what to do, they've talked to a nutritionist. So if you go from all kinds of meats to a pescatarian diet, fish plus vegan, it's very difficult. You're going to have problems, right? Very unlikely that you're going to have problems. Also, it's much more sustainable and much more doable for people because it's like, okay, at least I can have fish. It's much easier to have enough protein. I mean, it takes about half a kilogram, a pound of garbanzo beans or beans to have enough protein for the day, right? Not too many people are going to eat a pound of legumes per day, and that's one of the major sources of plant-based proteins. So the fish, I say, a couple times a week really makes it so much easier, so much doable, so much safer for the great majority of people. The other thing is, a few years ago, a paper came out in Nature and basically said, if we, from the health perspective, fish plus vegetable seems to be healthier than vegetables only, right? So than vegan only, right? So the pescatarians seem to be healthier than vegan only. And then they were talking about the planet, and they were saying basically that this paper basically showed that if the planet turned to be vegan, we will run out of land necessary to cultivate. The fish gives us this cushion or this ability to save some of the planet, space or area that should be used for crops, right? So even from that point of view, it seemed like, and the scientists were completely separated. I think one was from UC Santa Barbara. This is like they had no interest in. They were just saying, if we became all vegan, we will have a problem. We run out of space, And so yeah, those are my reasons. One is got nothing to do with health, and so I leave it last. I mention it because I know lots of people are also thinking about the environment and all of that. And unfortunately, some people may argue that we can do it, but I'm saying there is also a environmental component that will suggest that we need the fish, especially as the population still expands. We'll need the fish to have enough to make it to 2050. I think that was the projection.
Cool. And is there a particular kind of fish that you would go to? I know a lot of fish that we can pick up from certain stores and stuff still contain a lot of mercury and toxins that we've soaked up from the ocean. So is there a particular fish that you would go to or recommend?
Yeah, the small fish like the anchovies, the sardines, the salmon, the trout. Most of those are low mercury, and you can look it up. Once you find the fish that you like, look it up and find out if it's a high mercury content. Usually, large fish have more mercury, like swordfish and tuna. Different tunas may have different mercury content. So, if you love tuna, you can probably do it once a month. And then look for the ones, the types that have lower mercury content.
Cool, awesome. But then there's lots of people thriving as vegans, and they're getting all of their protein intake, and it's all under control. Then that would be fine to continue on, right?
I would suggest that they go to a nutritionist. They don't have to go all the time. Just go once, right? Go to a nutritionist and say, here's what I ate for the last week. Am I getting enough? Whenever I talk to people that are vegan, maybe 5% are getting enough. And they're all convinced that they are, right? But maybe 1 in 20 is getting enough. So be careful, because what you think you're doing right and what's actually right from the point of view of a nutritionist, and I'm not, obviously I'm advocating low protein diet, so I'm the last one that's going to tell you to overdo it. But 40 grams of protein, even 32 grams of protein, which would be like the bottom that any expert in the world will say you can have per day if you weigh 100 pounds. You can get per day in proteins. Even 32, it takes a little bit of effort to get from a vegan diet. It's not that easy, right? And I never see this vegan having this big dish of garbanzo beans like I do, right? Because 5 times a week I'm vegan, right? But people look at what I eat and they're very surprised. They go, "This is a big dish," and I say, "Yes, that's what it takes to have enough proteins." And so I think that's important. Go to a nutritionist and say, "Look, I don't want to have a high protein diet. I want to have a minimum protein diet, 0.72 or 0.7 even grams per kilogram, or 0.32 I think is grams of proteins per pound of body weight." And then ask, what does that look like in the type of foods that I eat? And they'll be surprised, because it's going to look like tons of, like, if you eat peas, for example, it might be a kilogram of peas to get 32 grams of protein.
Sure. Okay, awesome. Now, there is a lot of people as well that aren't particularly looking to lose weight or need to lose weight. They want to maintain for health. So do you recommend FMD to be still really good for people wanting to maintain and, just look at longevity?
Yeah, I do it. I'm BMI 22 and a half, 23. And so, yeah, people that are normal weight, well, first of all, there's lots of people that are thin and they may be obese, right? And it's really interesting. Like, if you have 25% body fat, you may have some of the same problems that obese people have, even if your BMI is actually low, if you're thin. So then you have to, of course, know really the details of what your health status is. Weight. We really never set out to do this for weight. We're set out to do this for health and youth. And weight happens to be one of the worst things you can, abdominal visceral fat seems to be one of the worst things you can do for your health, for your longevity and for your aging process, but also for your diseases. So clearly you have to get rid of that. And but even for those that don't, there is lots of other, if you think about it, in mice at least, and we'll see in people, but certainly in mice, a cycle of FMD is as powerful as a cycle of chemotherapy, right? With the difference that against cancer cells, with the difference that the FMD protects the normal cells, then the chemo kills the normal cells too. So just to tell you how this can be completely separate from weight and abdominal fat, and this may have to do with a cell turning to be autoimmune. That's what at least we see in mice, or precancers or cancers. So the fasting period is gonna make it difficult for those cells to survive. Now, some of this is being tested clinically, lots of it is not, and so for disease treatment or prevention, at least we still have work to do. But certainly, thus far, it's looking great. Also for disease prevention.
Wow, that's fantastic. And what about somebody who is looking to, I have 2 questions on that. The first one was, somebody asked, so when they're on FMD, that's going to target the visceral fat, is that right? And then the second question to go with that is, what about someone who's looking to gain weight?
Yeah, so it's going to target the visceral fat. It's going to have no impact or minimal impact on the, it may have a temporary impact on the lean body mass. Then we see this coming back right back within, let's say, a week of the end of the fasting vegan diet. And so that's a great way to specifically lose visceral and abdominal fat. And if you need to gain weight, you probably don't want to do the fasting vegan diet. We always tell people, if they're underweight or anorexic, or they just simply are normal but underweight, you got to gain weight. So eat more, eat better, and more. Read the book and eat lots of it. In the book I talk about eating a lot and not eating more and not less, but eating more of the right things. Yeah, so if you're underweight, make sure that you have the nuts in your diet, and then you have the the fish and the fatty fish, etc. And also, there's nothing wrong with some of the. I tell in the book, I talk about the bad idea of having these big dishes of pasta or rice, but the good idea of keeping the pasta in your dish. Now we're demonizing, carbohydrates, and I mean, it's crazy. It's completely crazy idea. And carbohydrates, as we mentioned earlier, are very good for you, but excess carbohydrates are not very good for you, especially if they're high gluten, et cetera, et cetera. So for multiple reasons, you have 150 grams of pasta, lots of it is going to turn into fat, right? If you have 50 grams of pasta and 300 grams of chickpeas or beans, that's a great dish. Right? And so I think that's if somebody's underweight, learn how to eat a lot like this, and slowly you're going to gain weight. And sometimes the pasta and the rice helps you gain a little bit of weight when you're on the very, very low side.
Yeah, awesome. Now, this is a little bit off topic, but it's come through a few times, so I thought I'd just quickly mention it. People have asked your idea on juice fasting. So juice fasting, and I mean FMD is very different, but do you have anything to add on juice fasting, its benefits or advantages, or none?
Juice fasting equivalent to going to the pharmacy, grab a bunch of the drugs that your friends take and that are recommended by their doctor, and start taking them all at once. Who knows, right? There could be sugars in there. There's probably sugars. It's out of control. It might do you great for 3 cycles and then hurt you on the 4th. It might do you great for 30 cycles. It's completely out of control, and is untested, out of control, and doesn't mean that it cannot benefit you, because what does that mean? Juice fasting, it could be anything, right? You could have something liquid that could be incredibly bad for you or incredibly good for you, depending on what it contains. And until you have mouse testing, you have human clinical trials, you have really understanding of the molecular aspects of it, meaning like what does it contain and why. Most likely in the long run, you're going to do more damage than good. I'll give you an example: calorie restriction. I come from the lab of the world expert on calorie restriction, Roy Walford at UCLA. And calorie restriction was just this idea that you reduce your calories by 30% and you're going to live longer. And lots of people start doing that. And lots of people start saying, it changed my life. Well, guess what? Then eventually my colleagues were able to do studies on monkeys that lasted 25 years. And what it turned out is that essentially it had no effect, right? So these poor monkeys were placed on this restriction for 25 years, suffered like hell, and then at the end of it, the bad side of it was as bad as the good side. So they balanced each other out. And the Wisconsin study had a little bit of an effect on lifespan, but no, little effect on lifespan, meaning that it was preventing diabetes, it was reducing cancer, reducing cardiovascular disease, yet having little effect on lifespan. So so the juice fasting and all this is, of course, calorie restriction was highly tested, right? This is not even tested. Right? So this is how crazy it is that people are doing these things. But I know there's lots of fans of these things, and they're gonna say, I did it did great to me, and what can I say, And it's like going to Vegas.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Okay. What are your thoughts on using a sauna throughout the FMD?
Bad idea, right? You're going to pass out, So heat is going to lower your blood pressure. And some of my colleagues that follow patients, for example, in the summer, August, they don't even recommend the FMD. In the hot air, like in Sicily, in the hot areas of the world. So if it's very hot, it's probably not a good time to do it unless you can stay in a cool place. Of course, if you can stay in an air-conditioned environment all the time, then it's okay. But of course, the sauna is going to bring you to the opposite, and very bad idea. Very hot showers, saunas, all of that to be avoided, particularly if you do 2 days or longer of fasting.
Awesome. And does dry fasting for like 3 days or more, does that go with the same as what you feel about water fasting and juice fasting? It's like, it's one of those things.
Well, again, we have something called the Food and Drug Administration, right? So every drug that anybody takes goes through about 12 years of testing, right? And in fact, I'll give you an example. We talking to the FDA consultants, they told us most likely the olives that you have in the FMD will have to be eliminated or made into a paste because you cannot quantify the content of an olive, right? Now, you could think it's exaggerated, right? But this is what the FDA does, right? It just standardizes to the level that there is zero uncertainty, right? I'm talking about an olive and olive paste. Now you go from that to whatever improvised fasting. You see how far these two things are, right? The control of an olive versus who knows what kind of fasting these people are doing at home, So yeah, it's taking medicine into their own hand. And of course, some people love that. They love to say, I've done it, it helps me. And I've seen lots of people die like this with cancer, for example, right? And they go and improvise. There is a new documentary on fasting and cancer patients. And I think a couple of people there died because of fasting. And they could have, not I think, I'm pretty sure, because I talked to my oncologist colleagues, and they say this person will have almost for sure have been cured, by surgery. And this person died because of this improvisation, right? And so, this is how bad it can get when people start thinking that they can improvise and they can do it on their own, and there is no need for doctors or need for things that are being tested. Now, I agree. Sometimes you go to the doctor and they say, forget fasting, forget all. There has got to be a compromise. There has got to be a reasonable way to integrate things that are powerful and natural, and not say, oh, I'm just going to take drugs because that's what's FDA tested. But you also cannot go on the other side and say, I'm going to refuse everything that is being going on for hundreds of years, and that's a medical system, just because I have a different idea. That's very dangerous. And again, people are going to get hurt. And if you watch this documentary, you realize that a couple of people in there probably died because of this approach of taking medicine in their own hands.
What would be your approach then? Like, how does one find that in-between balance that would be a good point to be at?
Well, first of all, I started the foundation in Italy and the United States, Create Cures in the United States, and the Valter Longo Foundation in Italy. And we have a nutritionist, a PhD, that answers the question. So, we're small and we can do what we can do now. But I think eventually, this is a free service that we provide. And basically, people, we say, don't go to the internet. I have a PhD, and if they don't know, they come to me. And we're going to do the same in the United States very soon. And that should be the way to do it. Try to find somebody that can help you. And say whether you have cancer or autoimmunity. And what we tell patients usually is, if you can wait, right? If you have stage 1 cancer and the surgery is going to give you a 99% chance of being cured, do it. Don't do it like this lady and die because you had to refuse surgery, right? And that's what she did. And but if you're stage 4 and your doctor tells you, hey, nothing is working here, well, then I would say, yeah, do the fasting mimicking diet, combine it with the standard of care, go to your doctor, let them know you're doing this, and the doctor has the ability to do compassionate use. Say, look, I understand we're running out of time. Nothing else is working. Let's give it a shot. Let's combine things. Let's do multi-therapy and see if it works. And in lots of cases, we've seen it work. Now, we need the clinical trials to know. Is it this combination? Does it happen by chance? But certainly we feel, because of the extensive animal data that we have and initial clinical data, that is probably fasting and fasting mimicking diet particularly can work very well in the treatment of lots of diseases. But again, we don't know for sure yet, and so you have to understand when you go to the doctor, it's like a clinical trial, right? It's a clinical trial of one patient, and that's how it should be handled. And the doctor should say, look, we don't know. This could make it's unlikely based on animal data and everything else we've seen, but it could make your disease worse, right? And we've seen that too, So in some cases, in this great majority of cases, we see people do better than expected. But sometimes we see people do worse than expected. And so that's the kind of warning that people have to be given before they start, introducing this into the therapy.
Beautiful. And I know we're running out of time now. We've got through so much today. What do you have a favorite story that you like to share on somebody's results from FMD that they've experienced?
Well, I mean, I have one every day now. I mean, it's like, but the last one was a week ago. This patient told me, and please, I'm telling you, do not do this at home because you could die. But this patient had type 1 diabetes. His pancreas no longer making insulin, right? And he writes to me and say, I did 4 cycles in a month of the fasting mimicking diet. And then he went and got the test. Insulin was back at normal levels. Now, a year later, it was back to low levels. But I mean, I just thought, I mean, I don't know. We've shown this in mice, right? And it was just unbelievable to see the patient. And he sent me the results, and it was like normal level of insulin. This guy had been type 1 diabetic for 20 years. So that was, I mean, just this week results, but lots and lots of people are now writing in with type 2 diabetes and all kind of cancer and all kinds of conditions where they're like free of the disease. Again, we don't know if it was the fasting mimicking diet, but certainly it will be consistent with the results that we see in mice.
Oh, amazing. And I see you light up every time you talk about some good results. So what is your drive? Like, what drives you to get up and do this work, and for the amount of years that you've been doing it?
I mean, this is it, right? The patience and the results and the ability to eventually get it, use all this very basic science to solve real problems, and if you have stage 4 breast cancer or prostate cancer or you have Alzheimer or whatever. I mean, I was always very surprised that how very few of my colleagues were saying, let's take this molecular talent that we have and expertise that we have and turn it into how can I help somebody this year, and versus 20 years down the road. Lots of the people that do research are like, oh, one day, but the patient has the problem now. So I think that's a drive, and we certainly now already with Prolon, I don't know, 70,000 people have done it, and now we're getting the report back from thousands of people and the doctors, and soon enough we'll be able to start saying, what do people use it for? What is it working very well for? And so that's the driver.
Beautiful, beautiful. Now, people can click on the link below the video that you're watching now if you want to find out more about Prolong or the FMD. There's loads of information there. They have lots of great links that you can go to if you have any questions on that and contact. So feel free to check that out in the link below. Otherwise, we have one last question saying, are you available for one-on-one consults, or how does one get in contact with Professor Valter Longo?
No, I'm not available, but my team is, right? So if you go to either the United States Facebook Professor Valter Longo page, you can write there, and some we have PhD nutritionists that'll respond, and if the problem is so complicated, then they'll come to me. But lots of the times they get the same questions over and over, then they can respond. They're very qualified. So we can definitely do that. In some cases, we've initiated clinical trials. We've started working with their physician either to start clinical trial to try to help them. But that's hopefully when we have more funds for the foundation, we'll be able to have many PhDs and MDs answering the emails and helping. But right now we're small, and so we have limited capability.
Yeah, beautiful. You're doing amazing work. And one last thing to wrap up, what would you say is like your best advice that you could give people right now that are embarking on this journey or playing with this thought, or any final wise words you'd like to leave us with?
I mean, obviously, read the book because it's. I think it's good to learn everything around it and the system and why am I advising what I'm advising, and then I think it's also important to get to a point where, whether it's the everyday diet or the fasting making diet, you really enjoy it, and with the fasting making diet it's a little bit harder, but I think if you do it 2 or 3 times a year, you will find out that many people look forward to doing it again. It's really interesting, and that's really the key. Find the everyday diet and then the frequency of the fasting making diet that you can live with and that you can be happy with.
Beautiful. Well, I really respect you and your time, and thank you so much for sharing. I believe you're in Italy right now, so thank you so much for spending time with us.
Okay, thank you very much.